Hello and welcome to our today's Coffee and Consulting with the topic Outbound Assignments from Switzerland. Can an assignee remain in the Swiss Social Security system while on assignment? My name is Friederike Ruch and I have the honor to be today your host. Before we start, there are a couple of housekeeping rules. One is that you will be all on unmute. So in case you have any questions or any comments or any topics you would like to know further, then please use the question box, write everything down, and we will be happy to answer them after the coffee and consulting event. Also, the slides, you can download them while the presentation is live. Even independent on that, we will record it and you will find the recording then in our YouTube channel and can listen to that again. As well as we will send you the slides to your email on top after the presentation. So I think because we have lots of slides prepared and the topic is quite complex, I think we also should start quickly. We will discuss the following four things. We start with looking at the types of assignments, and when we discuss the types of the assignments, you will also see that that is one of the reasons because of the complexity of that matter. Above all, Social Security is quite something which has so many different branches, so many different rules you have to look at. Therefore, that also makes it quite complicated. We will look then whether we can or how we can determine in which country someone is subject to Social Security. So in which country is a Social Security liability while someone is on assignment and what kind of rules we have to consider. Then we will quickly look at the matter of administration, like getting the necessary A1 or the certificate of coverage, what needs to be done, as well as how is the process. And on the last part, I would like to go and discuss with you three different cases to just kind of wrap up what we were looking at before. If we look at the different types of assignment, then that is definitely already it gives us already one answer to why it is so difficult to determine in which country someone is subject to Social Security. I mean, that also is or shows the difficulty then in regard to taxation, which we will not touch today, but also for all the other aspects. But looking now on Social Security, clearly you will see assignment. If we talk about assignments, then we start with a business trip, which is also a kind of assignment because the definition of it is basically for a limited period of time that someone works for his employer in another country. And that can be a business trip, which is clearly in for the Swiss employer. If we say we have someone being employed in Switzerland, someone goes on a business trip. Short-term assignment, there we talk about assignments usually up to 1 year or 2 years, depending a bit on the company. Long-term assignments, usually something which is up to 5 years, 6 years. However, we still have also assignments which are much longer than those 5 to 6 years. The 5 to 6 years are coming basically from the Social Security treaties, which are usually only for a period for up to 6 years. However, if we have assignments in non-treaty countries, then we still see assignments which are for a bit of a longer period. Now, assignment as such has nothing to do, or it's not just about Social Security, it's about other aspects as well. And the length, you also have to look at that at some point it will be in the end very difficult to get the employee back integrated in the home legal entity. Therefore, to limit an assignment makes definitely sense. And it also makes definitely sense to keep those assignments rather shorter than longer, looking at the fact that the individual should be then reintegrated in principle in the home legal entity. Sometimes also, if you assign someone abroad, you will actually issue the individual a local contract in the host country that is based on maybe immigration requirements or maybe on other requirements. But that does not mean that the individual is not assigned to the other country. So that does not jeopardize the situation at all. And then we also have to look, and that is more a bit in brackets because it's not really an assignment, those cross-border commuters or weekly residents, where we also have some social security aspects which we have to look at. Now, the main part is really that you really need to look at case by case and go through different steps to determine in which country the individual is in the end subject to social security. And also what I've learned is that even a case looks similar to another case, that does not mean that necessarily there is the same outcome of it. You really have to look case by case. And if we talk about Social Security, then there are two principles we have to look at. One is that usually someone is subject to Social Security in the country he is performing his work or is employed. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that, as well as that we have to also look at the different Social Security branches. If we say someone is subject to the Social Security in the country he is working, then, for example, I'm employed by Convenus and I'm working here in Switzerland. So clearly I'm subject to Swiss Social Security. In case I'm now not residing in Switzerland, but in another country, like for example Germany or France, then already the discussion is about is really everything subject to Social Security in Switzerland, or are there any exceptions? And what happens in case I actually also work in Germany, not just in Switzerland? Maybe I'm working in my home office for a day or two. Does that make any difference? There, I'm sure all of you have heard at least once that 25% rule, and now also the newer one, the 50% rule, which is quite important and kicks in those situations. So there we talk about activities in several countries. So I'm working in 2 countries, what happens there? The other exception we have is for assignment. So if I take just me as an example, I'm employed in Switzerland and I now Convenus, my employer, wants me to go and work for 10 months, for example, in Italy. So I'm assigned to Italy. Now for those 10 months I'm working now in Italy for my Swiss employer for conveners, then I can remain in the Swiss Social Security while I'm on assignment. And that is an exception. Now, those exceptions are not just for all situations. The basis for the exceptions are whether there is a treaty in place or not. And in regard to Social Security, or better to say our Social Security world, we divide in non-treaty states and treaty states. And non-treaty states, it's quite simple. In principle, if someone is assigned to another country, then basically there is, even if it's for the Swiss employer, we might end up in the situation that someone has to pay Social Security contributions in the country he or she is working in that non-treaty state. And there's just one possibility in Switzerland that you can remain voluntarily in case you fulfill all the conditions. And we will look at that in a second. Then you can remain in the Swiss Social Security system. Otherwise, you actually will not be able to pay any Social Security contributions in Switzerland. If we talk about a treaty state, then there is basically in all those agreements or treaties we have, there is the possibility that in case I'm assigned to one of those treaty states, I fulfill the conditions, I can remain subject to Social Security in Switzerland while I'm working in one of those treaty states. We will look in a second about the conditions to it, but that is the basic rule. So if I have a treaty state, then there is a very high chance the individual can remain in the Social Security system in Switzerland. If not, we will have to look whether those conditions are fulfilled. Now, we've seen that there are three different treaties have been indicated on that slide. There was one, the EU agreement, the EFTA agreement, or a bilateral agreement. So all three agreements, the first two, the EU agreement and the EFTA agreement, is basically a multi-state agreement. Those agreements are, if we talk about the EU agreement, it is for EU nationals and Swiss nationals in case they work now either in Switzerland or in one of the EU member states. If we take the EFTA agreement, it is for EFTA nationals or Swiss nationals working in Switzerland or in one of the EFTA member states. If we talk about bilateral agreements, then we talk just about one country, whatever the treaty country is. So someone is working in either of those two countries. The nationality doesn't play any role, and then he can be exempt from the Social Security in the home country and while working in the host country. So that is basically the difference between those three different agreements. Now, the first question I have to ask is, in which country does the employee work, or where is he or she subject to Social Security contributions before the assignment? So if I take my example, I'm employed in Switzerland, have paid contributions the last couple of years in Switzerland, and I'm now going on assignment for those 10 months to Italy. I'm Swiss national. So basically, yes, the EU agreement would be the right one to choose. In case now my nationality would not be Swiss, but I would be, for example, American national, then I can't use the EU agreement to look at and can consider that one. I need to look whether we have a bilateral agreement between Italy and Switzerland, and whether based on the bilateral agreement, then the whole situation can be reviewed. Now, the next question is to which country I'm actually being assigned, and it is Italy, so still I'm Swiss national working for a Swiss employer, being assigned for 10 months to Italy, so the EU agreement is still the right one. And what citizenship does she has? So if I take my example, I'm Swiss, so I would go under the EU agreement. So you have to ask those 3 questions in order to determine which agreement you need to consider, because that basically then gets us to the question about which conditions I need to look at. Now, if we take the example from me, I have to look at the EU agreement. So destination country is EU, so it's Italy. Nationality is I'm Swiss national, so I'm good as well. So the AHV insurance condition is that I have to have paid at least, or be a member at least for 1 month to the Swiss Social Security before I'm can be assigned to Italy in order that I can remain in the Swiss Social Security system. Now, that 1 month is not something which is really to use that as that period without any questions or without any possibility to get around it. In the end, the Social Security Authority will look at the concrete specific situation, and then in case even the 1 month is not fulfilled, there is a possibility to have also someone with less time being insured in Switzerland who can remain then in the Swiss Social Security system. Now, that 1 month is not just for if we use the EU agreement, it's also EFTA agreement or bilateral agreement. So independent of those 3 types of agreements, the 1 month is the basic condition. If we talk about non-contracting states or the non-treaty state, then it's the insurance period is then 5 years. So I have to have to be a member of the Swiss Social Security system for at least 5 years, and those 5 years just need to be directly before I go on assignment to a non-treaty state. Then I'm good and can remain in the Swiss Social Security system. However, that is just voluntary. So it's not something which has the effect that I don't have to pay Social Security contributions in the country I'm going to. The other requirements are basically it has to be for the account of the employer in Switzerland. So it's the Swiss employer needs to ask me to go there. It's as an assignee, he can't be a replacement of another assignee. It's just for a temporary or limited period of time. And the employer has to have business activities in Switzerland before the assignment. So we do have an issue there in case you have remote working people. If you have someone who is maybe employed at an employer in Germany, for example, but working remotely in Switzerland, there, if you assign now that individual to basically to Italy for 10 months, if you take the same situation, then most likely you will not get an A1 for that individual, even the condition of the 1 month has been fulfilled. even it's just for a limited period of time. But there are two things, and it's not a replacement of anybody else, another assignee. But the thing is, it is not for an employer in Switzerland, it's for an employer in Germany. And the employer has no business activities in Switzerland, and business activities means really a legal entity. Um, so therefore, the Social Security Authority, where you will request that A1 in the end, will deny that. Now, how does it look when we assign someone from Switzerland abroad? We've seen now what kind of conditions we need to fulfill, and then basically, if someone fulfills all the conditions, so we can say while going abroad and working abroad, the individual can remain in the Swiss social security system, then it is basically all the different social security branches. Now, the first pillar, as well as unemployment insurance, pension fund, accident insurance, as well as the daily sickness insurance. It is in brackets because it's in principle more based on labor law that is that someone will or that an employer will actually take out that insurance. Therefore, it is a bit it is in brackets. Compulsory insurance under the Swiss health insurance scheme. So someone who goes abroad on assignment, wants to remain in the Swiss social security system, also has to keep the Swiss health insurance. That is quite important. And even so that sometimes, or still sometimes, health insurance in Switzerland will say, oh, if you actually leave Switzerland, you deregister here, then basically we will also terminate the Swiss health insurance. But there you have to be really discussing that and negotiating that with them, because it is one of the key aspects to be able to remain here in the system. If someone will not keep the Swiss health insurance, actually even all the other conditions will be fulfilled, he will be, or the assignee will be kicked out of that and cannot remain in the Swiss system. That's also quite important to keep in mind. If you have someone being assigned for example, 4, 5, 6 years, that really during the whole time, someone has to keep the Swiss health insurance, and also have to keep that even though the Swiss health insurance might not be sufficient for the country the individual goes to. So if we look at the US, definitely the Swiss health insurance is not sufficient. So you definitely will have to take out an additional insurance to get a good coverage for the employee. And if we now look at what happens in the country of destination, so if we look at the sample from before, like I'm being assigned from Switzerland to Italy, then I can remain in the Swiss social security system, with the consequence that there are no contributions, nothing to be paid in Italy. So if an assignment goes under the EU agreement or EFTA agreement, then there is always the situation that there are no contributions to be paid in the country of destination. If we can't use either the EU agreement or EFTA agreement, but have to use, or can at least use, the bilateral agreement, then we have to look at the social security branches which are covered under or in the treaty. If in most of the situations, the pension fund is not included, as well as accident insurance and health insurance. So therefore, there's always a possibility, even we say the employee can be paying and remain subject to the coverage from Switzerland, we still might have to pay some contributions in the other country. So that you will need to check. Now, even if maybe not all the branches are covered in the agreement, still in the country of destination, they may say, oh, we will not request any payments, or there have to be no contributions to be paid, but that has to be checked. If we take the example from the US, then it is that in the US you might end up having to pay accident insurance as well as health insurance contributions. If we talk now about non-treaty states, so there is no social security treaty in place, then the situation is if the employee can remain voluntarily at least in the social security system in Switzerland, and they are also in all the different social security branches. The consequence is that depending on the country the person is working in, based on their legislation, you need to check whether contributions have to be paid. And sometimes there are still no contributions to be paid. That is true in a couple of African countries, because it's just they have a different setup there. But it can also be that you pay quite heavily in the other country, and yeah, then you have also to look at the benefit side, because the employee might then be receiving benefits on the one hand side from Switzerland, as well as on the other hand side from the other country. So that is then also something you have to look at and make a decision on how you want to deal with it. And this is here basically a summary of what we just talked about, with what the consequences are based on the different agreements, which might be a good overview for you, where you have to look maybe in a bit more detail, as well as where you can just take that from here. If we talk about assignments within the EU, then if we talk from Switzerland to the EU, then the temporary duration in principle is those 24 months. Within the EU, it is quite strict, and there is also no possibility that you can extend that. Now, for assignments from Switzerland to one of the EU member states, that is a bit different, because as we just have looked at, we also still have the bilateral agreements in place. So if we look at, for example, Germany, we have a bilateral agreement because that was in place before the EU agreement came into place. And we have the EU agreement. On the bilateral agreement side, there is the possibility that someone can remain in the Swiss social security system for about 5 years, with the possibility of extension to the 6th year. So if I'm now Swiss citizen being assigned to Italy for 36 months, so 3 years, then if just the EU agreement with those 24 months would come in place, that would mean that after those 24 months, I would be subject to Italian social security contributions. Now, if, for example, the individual is American national, the EU agreement cannot be used. Instead, the bilateral agreement has to be used. Therefore, the full period of assignment, the person can be exempted. That doesn't make any sense that a non-EU national is treated kind of in a better way than a Swiss national. Therefore, the rule is that for assignments between the EU and Switzerland, and the same applies between Switzerland and the EFTA member states, is that still we can look at those 5 or 6 years. However, it is always under the agreement between both countries. So you don't have the right or an entitlement also by law. It is that both countries still have to agree on it, and then you can have assignments up to 5, 6 years, even it is in an EU or EFTA member state. Administration, I said I want to look at it. In Switzerland, we use Alps, and I think that is quite handy. You can you will put in the application, and then also quite quickly, depending a bit also on the social security authority involved, the application will be approved. You get that online. You can share that with the employee, as well as you should share it with the payroll from the country the employee is being assigned to. And it will be stored there. So in case you have to do an extension of it or another one for another country, for the same employee, all the data is already indicated there, and you can just copy it from there, paste it in the new application, and be ready. I think it works quite well. Now there are still, with depending a bit on the countries involved as well as on the social security authorities involved, there are a couple of authorities which take a bit longer, because in the end, behind still the A1 or the certificate of coverage will be approved by the social security authority your company is enrolled with. So that still is in place. But I think in principle it works quite well. Now we talked already a bit about assignments from Switzerland to Italy. Now here's the example from France. A Swiss employee is assigned from Zurich to Paris for 2 years. His wife and 2 children accompany him during the assignment. Now the question is, what needs to be done? Clearly, the first question is, what kind of treaty do we have to consider? And if we look at, we have the involved countries, Switzerland and France, and the individual is Swiss national. Based on that, we can look at the EU agreement. Also based on that, we know that if we look at the consequences and what happens with it, we know that the individual can remain in Switzerland completely enrolled in all the insurance branches and will be exempted in France from paying their social security contributions. What needs to be done? From an employer perspective, they need to apply for the A1 via Alps and then provide a copy to all the involved stakeholders, meaning the payroll in Switzerland, the payroll in France, as well as the employee needs to have a copy of it. And it also is important that the employee has to keep his health insurance in Switzerland. Now, if we look at the wife and the 2 children, then that does not necessarily need to be the case for those. So they can actually also switch to the French health insurance system if that is the better option. The remaining in the health insurance system only is about the employee. Then we will move a bit forward and go to an assignment to the US. Here we have our case is a German employee is assigned to the US for 12 months from his Swiss employer. His family also accompany him during the assignment, And before the assignment, the employee lived and worked in Switzerland. The salary will be paid out in Switzerland while he is on assignment. And now is the question, what happens with that situation? And here also quite easy, I think. We have the involved two countries is Switzerland and the US. Definitely EU-EFTA agreement cannot be applied to because the US is not neither a country of those. So we have to look at whether there is a bilateral agreement in place, and we do have one. Now, what we also learned is that for the bilateral agreement, it doesn't matter what the nationality is of the employee. Therefore, we just can go ahead and say, yes, that we have one, so we are lucky. Now, from a Swiss perspective, we learned that if someone can remain in the Swiss social security system, then all those social security branches can be or are covered. So the individual will pay while on assignment in the US still contributions to all the different branches. Has also to keep the Swiss health insurance. What do we need to do as an employer? We need to get the certificate of coverage. We can also get that through ALPS, and then have to again provide that to all the stakeholders. We usually recommend to also forward a copy of it to the pension fund, accident insurance, as well as daily sickness insurance, but that is not really necessary. We think it's quite good that they are aware of it as well. So in case there's anything, they can also come forward with that and never can tell us that they were not informed about it. From the US perspective, what are the consequences? Now, the individual has to look at accident insurance. There might be something we have to pay to depending on the state, because accident insurance is different from state by state. So we have to look at that. And we have to look at the unemployment insurance, because that is also depending on the state, contributions have to be paid, because that is something which is not covered in the Social Security Treaty. Now also the 401k is not covered, so the pension fund is not covered in the treaty, but in the US that is not a compulsory insurance, therefore no contributions have to be paid. And the same answer is for the health insurance. In case the US changes the system, then there might be also that as an employer you have to pay contributions to those. And then we just look at the last example, the assignment from Switzerland to South Africa. There are two employees from the Swiss headquarters which will be assigned to South Africa for 3 years. One is Turkish and one is a German employee. So the Turkish employee has been working for 7 years already in Switzerland and is covered by Social Security in Switzerland. And the other one has just been moved to Switzerland when he started to work for the Swiss company and was only there for 3 years. Now, what happens with those? For the Turkish employee, yes, there is no social security agreement between Switzerland and South Africa. So we are in the non-treaty world. For that, we just have to look at whether we can voluntarily keep them in the Swiss social security system. For the Turkish one, he had been paying for 7 years to the Swiss social security system. So we are good. He fulfills the condition of the 5 years. He is working for the Swiss employer in the other country. Therefore, the application for the voluntary remaining in Switzerland can be requested under the Alps as well. And then also that has to be provided, a copy of it has to be provided to the payroll in South Africa, as well as to the employee and to the Swiss payroll. Now, the consequence in South Africa has to be checked then and reviewed whether still South African contributions have to be paid. And then, but that's a different topic, you also have to look at that from a tax point of view, whether those contributions will be subject to taxes, meaning the Swiss Social Security contributions, and there the employer part might be subject to South African taxes, as well as in case now the employer decides he will take over the employee contributions in South Africa, because they are there, otherwise the employee will have to pay double contributions, then those contributions will be also subject to Swiss Social Security. So it will be a quite expensive thing. The German employee we have seen, he's only had been working for 3 years for the Swiss headquarter, also having paid in the Swiss system or only for those 3 years. Therefore, he's not meeting the requirement of those 5 years. Therefore, he cannot remain in the Swiss social security system. So for him, or for that employee, it's clear there will be only South African contributions now. You would have to check whether how those contributions look like and whether there is maybe the necessity to actually have additional insurance coverage requested and taken out for the individual, that he or she is covered in a good, reasonable way, or the employee is just really aware of it, that their coverage is much less than the one he is used to in Switzerland. I hope that short overview in the very short time will help you for your situations. So the key thing you should take away from today's coffee and consulting session is really each case you have to look at the different or the specific situation, and then go through the questions and then determine in which country someone is subject to social security contributions. And really don't take it for granted that if you have the solution for one case, that you just kind of copy paste it for all the other cases. Depending on the specific situation, you might end up with a different result. And with that, I actually also would like to close today's session. However, in the last half minute, I just would like to point out our next seminar, which will be on the 11th of September, which will be live, held in Zurich. It's about assignments abroad, from Switzerland to abroad. And there we focus as well on the social security part. We have someone coming from the BSV, as well as from a pension fund and health insurance, to discuss that with us. And then on the 25th of November, we will talk about management transfer in Switzerland and the different requirements. We would be happy if you would like to join us there as well. And then our next webinar will be on the 26th of August, which will be about project and management services in Switzerland and working for external clients. I hope to see you there as well. And if not, then definitely maybe on our next Coffee and Consulting, which will be on the 7th of July. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a wonderful week. Thank you.